I'm 77 years old. 77. And the thing I need to tell you right now, before I say anything else, is that I am not going to sugarcoat a single word of this. The average American man who makes it to 65 has statistically about 16 years left. 16. I know that sounds abstract when you're in your 50s, still working, still running, still believing the best is somewhere just ahead of you. But I'm here. I'm past that marker. And let me tell you what those 16 years actually look like from the inside. The first 5 or 6 are reasonably good if you've been careful with your health, active enough, present enough. But the data doesn't lie. Most American men will spend somewhere between 4 and 8 years of their final chapter managing something. A diagnosis, a slow decline, a loss of independence that no retirement calculator ever puts a number next to. So here is the question I want to place in front of you right now. What are you actually building? Not saving, not preserving, building, because I spent most of my life confusing those two words, and understanding the difference between them is the single shift that changed the entire second half of my life. I want to share something today, something specific and honest, not a product, not a newsletter tip, not anything you've heard before. Something that took me until I was 68 years old to understand, and that once I did, moved my financial life to a place I genuinely did not believe I was capable of reaching after 65. Stay with me. I promise you this is worth your time, because this is the conversation I desperately needed when I was 55, sitting at a desk and thinking I had everything figured out. The story starts outside Columbus, Ohio, a small town where the winters were long and the values were older than the winters. My father worked the same manufacturing job for 31 years. Same clock in, same clock out, same handshake from the same foreman every Friday afternoon. He never complained about it. He was proud of it. And the deal he believed in, the deal he raised me to carry into my own life, was simple and ironclad. You work hard. You save steadily. You keep your head down and do your job. And at 65, the good years finally begin. That was the gospel I took with me when I left home. I went into insurance sales after college, built a territory in the Cleveland area, worked it with the same consistency and seriousness my father brought to that assembly line. I was good at it. I built real relationships with clients. I became someone people trusted with their risk, their businesses, their families' financial futures. I was proud of that work the way my father was proud of his. Margaret and I married in 1972. We found a house in a suburb with oak trees and decent schools. 3 children came along. We drove sensible cars, usually used. We took one family vacation every summer, but always drove, never flew. We had a financial advisor named Dennis, who had a chart on his wall showing compound interest going up and to the right. And every time I sat across from him, he'd tap that chart and say, "Robert, just keep feeding this. At 65, you'll be right here." And he'd point to a number at the far end of the line that always looked beautiful and safe and certain. I believed Dennis. I believed the chart. I believed Social Security would arrive exactly as promised, because I had paid into it faithfully for 38 years. I believed Medicare would cover what my body needed when my body needed covering. I believed retirement was the finish line, and everything I'd ever truly wanted was waiting patiently on the other side of it. Margaret and I would sit on the back porch in summer evenings and plan the years ahead. Italy was always first on the list. She'd wanted the Amalfi Coast since we'd seen it in a magazine before the kids were born. I wanted to drive Route 66, the whole length of it. No rush, no schedule, just the road, and wherever it went. We talked about real time with the grandchildren. We talked about gardening, about reading, about rest. Real, deep, earned rest. I worked until 66, one deliberate year past the standard retirement age, because Dennis had calculated the difference in my Social Security benefit, and the number was significant enough over a lifetime to justify the extra year. I was being smart. I was being responsible. I was doing everything the formula required. The retirement party was on a Tuesday. Cake in the break room. Handshakes from colleagues I'd known for 2 decades. My regional manager gave a speech about what I'd contributed to the team, to the clients, to the company. I smiled through all of it because I felt it was genuine. I drove home alone on a highway I had driven 8,000 times. I pulled into my driveway in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, walked through the front door of the house with the oak trees, and sat down at the kitchen table. The silence that landed on me in that moment was unlike any silence I had known. Margaret was still at work. The kids were scattered across the country in their own lives. The coffee was cold on the counter. The dishes sat clean in the rack. The ordinary objects of my life were exactly where they'd always been. And I sat there and felt something I had no name for yet. Something between relief and a low, quiet dread that I pushed aside almost immediately because I told myself it was just an adjustment. I had saved, I had planned, I had arrived, and I had absolutely no idea what came next. The first year had real beauty in it. We went to Italy, finally. Margaret stood on a terrace above Positano, and the light was extraordinary. And I took a photograph, and she looked free in a way I hadn't seen in years. And I thought, this is the reward. This is what the decades of work were for. But my right knee had been wrong for 2 years, and I had been ignoring it during the work years, the way you ignore anything that costs you time you don't have. With the sudden abundance of time, I couldn't ignore it anymore. By the second day of walking cobblestone streets, I was visibly limping. Margaret had an expression she wore when she was calculating quietly. We came home 3 days early. I told her it was fine. She didn't argue. The orthopedic surgeon said the knee was done, and had been for a while. Medicare covered a portion of the replacement surgery, a portion. The co-pays, the physical therapy sessions, the medications, the follow-up imaging. It accumulated into something I had not specifically budgeted for. Not a catastrophic sum, but more than I had internalized when Dennis mentioned abstractly that health care would be a factor in retirement spending. Then came Margaret's diagnosis. I won't spend long on that here. She is well now, genuinely well. I'm grateful for that in a way that goes past words. But the year that followed her diagnosis, the year of appointments and imaging and specialists and decisions, and the particular weight of uncertainty that medical situations carry, that year showed me the true shape of the plan I had built. I saw its edges. I saw what was inside and what was outside the boundaries of what I had prepared for. One night, while Margaret slept, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a calculator. I wrote down every source of monthly income, the Social Security check, the 401k distribution, the small amount from a savings account. I wrote down every realistic category of monthly expense, including the healthcare costs I now understood through actual experience rather than projections on a chart. I looked up the numbers for long-term care, memory care, in-home nursing services, assisted living facilities in our area. The sensation in my chest when I looked at those numbers was specific and cold, and unlike anything Dennis's optimistic chart had ever produced in me. The plan was not catastrophic. If everything went reasonably well for a reasonable number of years, the math worked. But the margin was thinner than the story I had told myself for 38 years of saving, thinner than I was prepared for. And in that thinness, I had to face something honestly for the first time. I had been building toward a number, but the number was a floor, not a ceiling. I was standing on the floor, and the floor was sufficient until circumstances decided it wasn't. I had spent my entire working life preparing to stop. I had not spent a single year preparing to keep building in a different way. And those are not the same preparation. My brother-in-law Frank called on a Saturday morning in October. He was 64, commercial real estate his whole career, 1 year from his own retirement. He had been approached by a regional firm about a consulting arrangement, 2 days a week. His knowledge, his contacts, his 30 years of pattern recognition in the market. They didn't want his hours. They wanted what 30 years had deposited inside his mind. Frank said something at his kitchen table that afternoon that I have turned over in my thoughts nearly every day since. He said, "They are not paying me for my time anymore. They are paying me for my 30 years. And my 30 years are worth more right now than they have ever been before." I drove home with that sentence. I sat with it for 2 weeks, and then I started making calls. I reached out to 3 former clients whose businesses had grown considerably since I'd last worked with them actively. I didn't call as an agent. I called as an advisor, someone who could review what they had, identify the gaps, and tell them honestly whether their risk structure made sense for where their business now stood. I told them what I would charge by the hour, a rate that reflected 3.5 decades of knowing exactly what I was looking at. All 3 said yes without hesitation. Within a year, I had a real consulting practice, 12 to 15 hours a week. Work I did from home or from a coffee shop when I wanted the company of noise, or once from a table in Portugal when Margaret and I spent 3 weeks traveling. The income was genuinely meaningful, not because I needed it to pay the electric bill, but because it was new money, surplus income on top of the floor I'd already built. Money I could invest aggressively because it wasn't capital I'd spent 4 decades protecting. And here is the thing I could not have anticipated before I lived it. I felt alive again. In a way, retirement had been quietly draining from me. The part of a person that thinks, that solves, that connects ideas and creates real value and contributes to something outside themselves. That part does not want to retire. It never wanted to retire. It only wanted different terms, fewer hours, more autonomy, more meaning concentrated into each hour. And when I gave that part of myself a new structure instead of a forced ending, it rewarded me with energy and clarity I had not felt in years. Here is what the secret actually is. Not a product, not a vehicle, a shift in identity. Stop thinking of yourself as someone who has finished building and started preserving. Start thinking of yourself as someone who is building differently, on new terms, at a different pace, with different tools than you used at 35. The knowledge inside you right now, at whatever age you are reading this, is not just the residue of a career that's ending. It is an asset, specific, rare, earned through decades of genuine experience. And there are people who need it and who will pay meaningfully to access it. Younger professionals, business owners navigating complexity, organizations that need senior judgment without a senior salary. The question is not whether the market for what you know exists. It does. The question is whether you are going to offer it or let it retire alongside you. Your 401k and your Social Security check are your floor. Build them well. Protect them. Maximize every dollar. But if you build a second income layer on top of that floor, an income built from your expertise rather than from your hours, something changes fundamentally. You have a cushion for the healthcare costs no plan fully anticipates. You have surplus to invest in good years. You have a reason to engage your mind that keeps you sharper and more present than any retirement hobby can replicate. And you have the ability to leave something real behind. My net worth crossed a threshold at 72 that I genuinely had not expected to reach. It was the product of consulting income, investments made from that income, and the compounding of those investments across several years of active building. Not magic, not luck. A decision I made at 68 to keep building on different terms instead of accepting that the building phase was over. Last spring, Margaret and I went back to Italy. 12 days this time. We walked the Amalfi Coast properly. Good shoes, no agenda. We ate slowly at a table above the water and watched the light change on the sea. And I sat with that feeling that is very hard to describe to someone who hasn't earned it the long way. I felt like I had won, not against anyone else, against the version of myself who almost decided that the best was behind him. Listen, I am 77. Time is not theoretical for me. I know exactly what the statistics say about men at this point in the journey. I know what the years ahead likely hold. And I am not standing here telling you that it all works out beautifully, or that there are no hard days, or that preparation prevents every loss. It doesn't. But I am standing here telling you this with every bit of certainty I have earned. The moment you decide your building years are finished, they are finished. And the moment you decide there is still something to build, something always appears. Always. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait until you feel entirely ready. Because ready is the story we tell ourselves to justify not beginning. Start small. Start imperfect. Start this week if you can manage it. Because 77 arrives faster than any summer you've ever lived through. And when it comes, I want you to be standing somewhere that you chose, looking back at a life where you never stopped building, where the second half was as real and as generative as the first. That is the one thing nobody told me, and it is the one thing I am telling you now.